Welcome to Through the CSI Lens, Behind the Yellow Tape podcast. I'm Christina Brakeman, and I will be your host. I spent years working as a crime scene investigator, so this podcast will be part memoir, part true crime. I'll be sharing stories that are real. The experiences will be all mine, and I'll tell you what it's like to stand where the cameras go. So with that being said, let's talk a little bit about some of my first days as a crime scene investigator. So before I started the Crime Scene Academy, I went on what we call a ride-along with a seasoned crime scene investigator. So at this point, my role is only to observe and ask questions. What I recall about that day is that it was super sunny, it was hot, it was in June, so the temperature was well over 100 out here in Arizona. We both made sure that we had all of her equipment that she would need for her scene. We had plenty of water, as we knew we would most likely be at our scene for a while because it involved a death investigation, which means dead body. I recall it being located in the south part of the city. This area was well known for crime, rampant with criminal activity. So responding to that area for a death investigation was not uncommon for the crime scene unit. As we're driving to the location, I just recall feeling kind of nervous about what I was going to see. I was filled with anxiety as to whether or not I would be in a place where I could handle processing a death investigation. Obviously, this is my first day, and I really had no idea what to expect. So just the unknown made me nervous. I was also interested to see if I would really be able to handle the sights, the smells, the sounds that might be associated with the scene that we're headed to. And I have to tell you, nobody prepares you for that. What you're about to see is not normal. Normal people do not see this on a daily basis. So as you can tell, a lot was going through my head before I even arrived on the scene. And honestly, that stayed with me throughout my career. You always have to mentally prepare yourself for what you're about to go do, see, hear, smell. It's just part of the job. At least it was for me. So as we proceeded to the location, we turned down the street that the scene was located on, and I noticed right away, as soon as we turned the corner, a very pungent, foul odor in the air. I recall asking the crime scene investigator if she thought that was related, and let me tell you, she looked at me and said, absolutely, that's the smell of decomposition, and I will never forget that smell. After that, again, like I said, I never forgot that smell. I always knew what to expect if and when I responded to a death investigation. I mean, it's really hard not to forget that distinct odor, trust me. There was some police activity on the street, but not much. It seemed pretty calm and normal day in the neighborhood. After all, it was summer, kids were out of school, and people were just kind of loitering around the area, going about their business. Of course, we had a few what we call looky-loos who like to stop and watch behind the yellow tape. That's not uncommon at your crime scenes. There was yellow crime scene tape securing the area when I observed a vehicle parked along the north side of the road, and so I decided, that must be part of the scene. We exited our vehicle and approached the officer on the scene. I watched and listened intently because I knew that this must be an important step when you go to a crime scene and approach the crime scene with the officer trying to gather information. So again, I'm just watching and listening intently because I knew, again, this had to be an important step. At this point, the crime scene investigator, she's just gathering all the relevant information, names, addresses, vehicle information, when was the scene located, are there any witnesses, are there any outstanding suspects, any injuries, any evidence that we need to know about, what did the officer observe when they arrived on scene, anything noticeable. We need to try to retrieve any pertinent information so that we can process our crime scenes thoroughly. At that point, I recall her asking if the medical examiner's office had been notified and whether they were sending a death investigator to the scene. And so for the agency I worked for, any death investigation that we investigated if there was not a doctor's signature to write off on the death certificate, or if it was suspicious in nature, maybe a homicide, a suicide, a death investigator would respond to our scene. That was something I learned right away. And I also learned that it can take hours before a death investigator can get on scene. So you may be stuck at your scene for hours. And that's no fault of theirs. It's just a staffing issue. And, Maricopa County is a busy place. So, that stayed with me throughout my career there. So one thing that I thought was kind of interesting that I took away from the scene was, while we were there, we learned that the officer had originally called to have this vehicle towed because it had apparently been left abandoned. So the tow company arrives on scene to tow the vehicle, only to determine there was a body in the vehicle. So imagine the shock on our faces when we learned that this vehicle was almost towed with a dead body inside. I'll never forget that. I don't know how that happened, but it happened. Really none of my business, but I'm glad that the tow truck driver was keenly aware that somebody was in the vehicle. So as we approached the vehicle, I just noticed the smell was really strong. All the windows were up in the vehicle. You could tell there was some insect activity inside. So we opened up the vehicle door, and of course, we see the decedent in the driver's seat. Again, more insect activity in the cab of the vehicle. I also noticed that bodily fluids happened to be running out of the driver's side onto the asphalt below. But other than that, nothing else was really distinguishable about the vehicle or inside the cab of the vehicle. It was just a normal vehicle. And again, we opened up that door. The odor was very strong. It was foul. It was bitter. It was sour. Just something that you'll never forget, that very distinct smell. Saw some maggots in there, beetles, a few flies. And obviously the body was heavily discolored because it's in June in Arizona. It's over 100 degrees. So the body is going to decompose at a faster rate because of the environment that it's been in. Plus, it's been enclosed in a hot vehicle. So compared to if, let's say, you were in an air-conditioned residence or business, the body would not decompose as quickly as what you would find in the circumstance we were at. I just noticed some of the observations I made. The body was super dark, black, blue, some green discoloration, making it really difficult to ID the person who was in the vehicle. I don't recall who the vehicle belonged to, but I know that the person or the driver did not have any ID on them. So the body was removed at this point because the medical investigator had arrived on scene. And one thing to keep in mind is that we technically do not touch the body until the medical investigator arrives on scene. The scene is the police department's, but the body belongs to the medical examiner's office. Yes, they still do life-saving measures, but as far as the manipulation and any of that with the body, it really should be done by your medical investigator, your death investigator that responds to your scene. At least that's how we did it out there. And we all knew that. We were all trained that way, and officers also knew that. So anyway, the medical investigator got out there. We took photographs, obviously, of the scene of the decedent. The death investigator examined the body to try to see if there was any apparent wounds that we should make note of. But unfortunately, because of the condition of the body, the decomposition, there was nothing noticeable at the time, which isn't uncommon when you have a body that's in full decomposition. So at this point, the body was placed in what we called a body bag or a transport bag, and it was zipped up and sealed by the medical investigator. They usually document the outside of the bag with the decedent's name, but since there was no form of official ID on the person, they could not be ID'd. They listed as the person as a John Doe. And I remember thinking to myself, how sad to go through your life and live your life only to have it end in this situation and then not have an ID to you, not have a name. Nobody knows who you are. So you're just listed as another John Doe. And I just thought that was really unfortunate. But moving forward, the crime scene investigator I was with continued to ask more questions, and then she finished up her photography at this point. There was nothing for us to collect on scene, so we obviously touched base with our officer and then cleared the scene at that time. So we were probably there, 4 or 5 hours until we cleared the scene. So at this point, what we typically do would go back to our office. At this point, she would complete her paperwork for the case. So downloading her photographs, writing her report, sending it off for approval. If she had collected any evidence at this time, that would have been submitted as well. I'm actually just sitting there watching her work, looking at her report, getting some feedback, because what I recall is that report writing was a very difficult task, and they were very specific about it. So the more information you can get on how to write reports and take that information in, the more qualified, more prepared you're going to be when you're in the academy and start having to write reports. So I definitely took the time to review what she was doing so that I could become more familiar. Some of the other things that I noticed, as I stepped back from that scene, with the downtime I had, I really took a step back and realized that I was really doing this, that I was going to be a crime scene investigator. I was going to be seeing and smelling atrocious things on a daily basis. And I realized that when people see us, they're really having a bad day, and sometimes it's their worst day. I'm that person. I know with all the TV shows and the forensic files shows that people like to watch, they kind of glamorize this job as it's cool. But let me tell you how many times people have said in response when they find out what I did for a living, how cool, that's such a cool job. I don't know if I would agree with that. Are there cool aspects to it? Absolutely. But I would not call it a cool job. I would call it more of a necessity, a need within your community. Someone has to do that job. Someone has to get answers. After all, our victims deserve that, right? We all want answers. We want to be able to resolve the case. When we're going to the scenes, we're not wearing, like TV shows, we're not wearing fancy suits and driving expensive SUVs. We're not wearing our hair down and wearing makeup and jewelry. That's not what we're going to be doing. You might see detectives do that, but you're not going to see crime scene investigators do that. Especially, it's just not realistic. You can try it, but it's not realistic for the type of work that we're doing. Also, I know that TVs try to make you believe that we can solve any crime within an hour. That's just not true. Yes, we may get some investigative leads. Yes, we may have a suspect in custody, but it's more than that. It's not just that one thing that's required to solve a case, especially a case that you desire prosecution on. Everything has to be thorough. The reality is it takes time to work a crime scene or an investigation. It's a collective effort with highly trained and skilled professionals collaborating with one another for the purpose of identifying or exonerating someone, as well as confirming or substantiating what actually occurred at the scene. That's our end game. People tend to think the hardest part is the blood, the gore, the visual representations. But for me, it was never about that. It was about the details that oftentimes I took away from those crime scenes. And unfortunately, more times than I care to admit, bringing them home with me and then not being able to forget. Or further in my career, driving by certain areas of my city and be like, oh, I remember I handled a homicide down that street. Oh, I remember twins died down that scene. Or I remember I went to a vehicle burglary. Those are the things that you remember. I think the reason why, for me, this first scene stayed with me so much is because, one, there were mistakes made. Obviously, you learn from them. And I realized at that time, and even now, I'd never want to be that person, at least not intentionally. Did the officer make a mistake? Yes. Why was that mistake made? I have no idea. Honestly, that's none of my business. But I just knew that I needed to be thorough moving forward and ensuring that I'm obtaining, retrieving, collecting as much information from my officer on the scene or my detective, even my victim, to do whatever I needed to do to make sure that I could process that scene thoroughly. Because at the end of the day, I'm the one responsible for the outcome. And trust me, you do not want to be called into the office or standing up testifying in court and having to explain why something was not done, why something was overlooked, why a mistake was made. So, with that being said, I'd love it if you could tune in next time. And I'll talk a little bit more at my next episode on some of the training that I went through, especially through the Crime Scene Academy, the continued education that I pursued, as well as some of the cool training opportunities I was able to participate in. So if you would like, make sure you stay tuned for that. And if you liked this episode, I'd love it if you'd subscribe, leave a review. It helps others find the show. You can also follow me on Instagram at through_the_CSI Lens for photos, some behind the scene notes. Thanks for tuning in, and I will see you next time.